Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's Workshop. Well, today we're going to be working again on the 1981 Shovelhead. It's an 80 cubic inch. We're going to be installing the oil pump, cam, breather gear, outer cone, maybe even electronics in it. I don't know. See how far we get today. And drop in the lifter boxes. We'll see what's going on here. Anyway, let's get to it. Okay. Now I've applied a little grease onto the oil pump base area here, and I also want to kind of lubricate the gears on the inside just to help in later on. So once again, I'm using that stabilizer from Lucas. I just like to have that kind of lubed up in there before I put everything together. So now what we're going to end up doing is sliding this in, and I'm going to put a little bit of grease on this shaft. Help lube it up a little bit. And we'll slide this in the hole here. Now, one thing I like to do at this point, I will use one of the longer bolts for where the short bolts go, just so that I can install this a little easier. So we're going to slip that gear up in there. You got to kind of play it on there. Now, the real trick is that, let me slide that back just a hair. What I want to do is let me show you here. I'm trying to get this slot for the keyhole lined up with the other one. So I'm going to put it in a little bit of an angle, because what we're going to end up doing is that we're going to just slide this key in from the outside. So I get it down to where I can see it and play with it here. Make sure that gasket is somewhat lined up. I think we'll use another one just to stabilize it. There we go. That'll keep that gasket from moving around. All right. So let's get this gear on there. Just walk it up on. I find if you can have that keyway leaned out a little bit, it makes it easier to install that keeper in there, and then just rotate the shaft so we line up with everything kind of lines up together. And then we're going to slide this in. So now what we have is this little keeper clip that's got to go on there. This can be fun too. Put that little snap ring on that's inside here that holds the gear in place. And let me show you on another one. There's a groove right in here that this snap ring rides in. And what that does is it holds this keeper in place on the shaft. I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put this gear cover back on. Okay, what I did is I applied a little bit of lubricant down on the gearing. I put some grease on the back side here of the gasket, and so that we could install this. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set this in a couple of the screws just to hold it in place, and I'm going to torque these two right here. Now all these bolts get torqued down to 120 inch-pounds. All right. And why I did those two first is because I have the oil feeds right in my way. So now we'll torque these down. And these I usually do in a crisscross pattern. So we'll torque these. These are usually torqued between 90 and 120 inch-pounds. I'm torquing these at 120. And it changes on whether you're using plastic or the white paper, but we got the black paper, and that's what they call for. Now, a couple of things that I have done here. I have removed the oiler, plugged it, and this would run off to your primary, and that would be your adjustment. And then another thing that we need to put on is that we need to put the oil pressure gauge on. Now, some of you guys may not be running an oil pressure gauge, no big deal. The electric, you may be running like what I do up here. I run off, I've got one that goes in to where the screen goes, and I run both. I run the electric and the gauge style. Screw that in. So basically, this is the in feed, this is the out, this is the breather for the tank, and this is the breather for the engine that I run off. And usually what I'll do is I'll hook a hose onto that, and I'll run it over and kind of guide it so it sits on top of the chain, because when you aspirate oil out, it puts it on the chain. It kind of adds a little extra oiling. I'm not sure that these are going to be in the right place. I may have to change them later. While I was doing the editing on this part 2, I was looking at the comment section on my YouTube channel, and one of the questions came up about why does my Shovelhead sump oil after it sits for a while. Well, there's a couple reasons because of that. Let me get a pump and I'll show you. What ends up happening is that this right here is the ball or the pressure area, and you have your inlets coming in from this area here, and the oil will come down through here, leach into this, and go into the lower case area and into that. And how they resolved the problem years ago is that you have an enclosed primary. So what ends up happening is that feed that goes across to the primary was to oil the primary chain, and then it got sucked back out again and into the system. So you never had that leak problem, basically. But the older Harleys were a lost system, so they tended to lose oil anyway. Now I'll show you what he's asking, and we'll do it on this old 84 that's been sitting for a while. And what happens here is that a lot of guys will go to a belt drive system. Now the 81 that we're working on is an open primary. This 84 has a belt drive in it, so I've eliminated the oiling system on it that would go to the primary itself. So I'll show you what's going to happen here. Now this bike hasn't been started for a while, so it should sump. So now you can see what has happened. I mean, it just sumped out all that oil that was sitting in the bottom of the case there. So there's a couple ways you can resolve this problem. One, you never change, you just leave the chain system on and have it a closed system. Two, you can either put a pan under it and start this thing once a week so that it circulates that oil. Or three, you can put in a oil can catch basin that runs through the breather, and basically all it is a breather hose goes in to a catch basin for the oil and then goes out so the engine can breathe. That's your solutions. Now if somebody else has a better idea out there, put it in the comment section or send it to me on my email. All right, so we're going to put in the cam and the breather gear, and want to make sure that these items are clean and not damaged. So what I've done, I have applied some lubricant up inside there. Now there's a couple of spacers. There's this little case spacer that goes back up in there, and then we have another spacer on the cam itself. So that just kind of slides on there. What I like to do is I've already added a little bit of lubricant to the cam bearings. So I'm going to slide this in. What we're going to end up doing here is that there's two marks right here. This mark here is for the crank. So we'll get that lined up, and you'll find another line on the pinion gear. So this all kind of slides together. Yep, one tooth off. So what you want to do, get this lined up here. You want to line these marks up right here. Now this is going to move on me. You can hold this in place. Let me grab my tool. So what I did, let me show you here. I've got this little setup on here that's holding the crank still so that I can line up these marks right here. Now what we have also is that we have to time the breather gear, and it lines up with that mark right there with this little T mark. I don't know if you can see that. It's got a little T on there. So we're going to put a little lubricant on this. Make sure I've ran, let me wipe it down. And let's see what's inside the case here. Anything? Just make sure we're not running against some grit or anything in there. All right, so let's slide it in there. Twist a little bit. So that's going to line up with that mark. Everything should line up on your marks and all that. That's your breathing and everything. This also on here is a shim for the case to hold that in a proper position once you put the cone on. So I'm going to apply a little grease on this, and that'll help stick it in place until we get the cone on. One thing I want to do before we put the cone on is I want to put in a new seal for the cam area, and it's fairly simple. You just get it down in there. Now I've just got a socket here, and what I'm going to do is just in there so it's good and flush, and that's why I went oversized so that would fit in that area right there. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lube this up before I stick it on the cam. Take a little bit of grease and go around on that. So this will also help it slide on to the cam easier. And then I'm also going to apply a little grease to the inside of the cam bushing and the crank pinion bushing. All right, so one of the things I did is I applied a little bit of grease before I put the gasket on, just to help hold everything in place. And then I'm going to apply a little bit more grease around these areas so they're good and lubricated, even on that spacer there. So this all is going to fit in there quite nicely. So you want to slide this on. There's a little tube down here you want to stick this breather pipe into, And everything should line up, as they say, like that. Now all we have to do is put the screws in. Tell you what, I'm going to put the screws in, and then we'll get back to torquing it. All right, we're going to torque these down to 90 inch-pounds. And this one I'm going to leave a little loose because I got to run the wiring and everything through that. So we can set the manual centrifugal advance on there. And there's a little pin right here. Now, in the past, I've actually seen these pins break, and guys can't figure out why they can't start their bike, and the timing is shifted here. So you want to make sure when you put that on is that there's an actual groove. There's an actual groove on the end of the cam right there. This little groove right here is what you want to line up that pin with. When I put these centrifugal advances in, I usually try to feel these things. They fit in that little groove right there. You'll feel it if you can't turn it. If it's not in, it'll sit and spin. So you can just kind of spin that around, and you got to work at it a little bit, and then it pops down in there. But right now, I'm going to get some Loctite, some blue Loctite, and put on this. Be right back. And if you're doing these, even with the points and these electronic, this is a Maori ignition. It goes on one way and one way only, but it'll slide on there. But you can put it on backwards, but you can see it doesn't fit down close. You want to make sure that it slides all the way up in there. So I put a little Loctite on there. And we're going to slip this up in there, and I'm going to spin this around till it drops in. So I'm going to tighten this up. Okay, I just tightened that locking bolt down for the centrifugal advance, and it should sit in there. When you push on it, it should snap right back. And now the pickup point can go on there. Now this is a Maori one that I've used. The E-Spark works pretty good. I've used them over the years. And basically that just slides down, the wiring slides down in that hole in the cover there. You got to work at it. Okay. Now I have some timing marks on here that I've used and lining everything up with. So I've got my mark right there and a couple up here that I use, and then I have these. I'll have to double check everything again, always do. So we'll just run that up and snug them because we don't have everything quite set up yet. Okay, since we've gotten the screws on the cone torqued and the ignition in, we can move on to the lifter blocks. Once again, I've applied a little grease to the outside of where the blocks ride, and so it'll help stick the gasket in place. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply a little bit of lubricant in here on the cam itself. So we're going to put the front one on, line up the gaskets proper. Now there's a little hole right here, and what that is that's for when the push rods drain back, they drain back into the case, and that's why you have to line that gasket up on there. If you notice here, I've got a rubber band in to hold these lifters in place so they don't fall out. So let me get this lined up, dropped in there. All right. So now we have the bolts for this. So they have 4 on each. And these take a special little socket, which I just happened to find through S and K, 12 point, I believe it is what it is. And we'll install these. I believe these lifter blocks bolts on here are set between 65 and 105 inch-pounds. That pretty much handles it. The only thing I want else put in here is I want to put in that tappet screen. Okay, this tappet screen goes in there. Make sure it's clean. And it's got the spring that holds it down. And then mine is set up for having a gauge put on it. So I'm just going to screw it down in there. You always want to pull those out when you're changing oil in these engines. Make sure they're good and clean. They will pick up particulates. Alrighty. Looking good. I hope you've liked this part 2 of this old Shovelhead. We installed the oil pump, we put in the cam and the breather gear, we put on the cone, we added the ignition system, and we put in the lifter blocks. And if there's any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below, or you can send them to my email at tmiyagi@hotmail.com. And if you have liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget that ringy-dingy button there for the next episode coming up. So this is Mr. Miyagi saying be safe out there. Hope to see you on the road. Ciao.